Pete, thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Tim.
I know how busy you are, and I know how hectic life can be. So, how have you been?
Yeah, good. Yeah, sort of running around all over the place at the moment, but
Yeah,
um, it's nice to be wanted.
yeah, it is. What are you up to?
All sorts. Doing some sessions, doing some stuff with some different orchestras, doing kind of a few dates a week on a tour.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, sort of a variety of things.
It's good. It's always good to you can. I don't know. I'm sure it's the same with you, but you just find things get a little bit stale if you're doing the same thing week in, week out.
Yeah, I find variety is the spice of life. I need to be constantly doing different things to keep me sort of interested and engaged and challenged.
Yeah, yeah. And how's music and life been post COVID?
Yeah, I mean, obviously COVID wasn't ideal for any of us, but it's picked up quite quickly. It was interesting after after the whole lockdown thing sort of
Yeah,
finally ended. Everything seemed to suddenly kick back into sort of life, surprisingly, almost worryingly quickly, to the point where, you wondered whether, I don't know, it was a sort of false dawn, everyone was too enthusiastic and it was all going to come crashing down again. But actually, after that sort of initial spell, things have kind of been pretty consistently good overall. So, yeah, I mean, COVID times was obviously awful, but yeah, since then it's been okay. It feels like it's come back to something close to where it was before. I don't know how it's been for you.
It was the same. Like we had the however many months it was, 6 months or so, and then when things kicked back in that I think it was the start of the summer of 21, I was out 4 or 5 times a week. There was a huge backlog of weddings. There was a huge load of all the teaching just kicked back in straight away. It's like school, as soon as schools opened, I think parents were just like pushing their kids back into school as quickly as they could. So yeah, that all sort of kicked back off again, and it feels like it sort of died off a little bit, but it's sort of remained fairly good, which is I think that's good for everybody. But everybody,
yeah, absolutely.
yeah. So I'm going to ask you, how did you get into music? What was your kind of doorway?
I mean, as a kid, I was always loved music. I sort of from an early age always saw myself as being some kind of a musician. And kind of fantasized about doing various things. I wanted to be a drummer at one stage. I was very into madness. I wanted to be a sax player.
Okay.
As a kid, even a singer, I think. But then when guitar took hold, then it never occurred to me that I would do anything else. It was always sort of set on being a musician. And I was lucky I got to sort of start working with some local musicians where I grew up and playing around sort of pubs and clubs and starting to kind of earn a living out of music, or at least see a way to earn a living out of music from a sort of fairly early stage, which helped.
Okay.
But yeah, I suppose that's, sort of working with those sort of people helped me actually get into music kind of and see it as a career. But yeah, definitely once I took up the guitar, it was never really in question that I'd do anything else.
There was no drum kit hiding in the back.
There's no drum kit. No, I've never got the drums down actually.
Okay.
Wish I had.
And how old were you when you started playing?
I was 12, I think.
Okay. I think 12 is a good age for guitar. There's a lot of kids that I teach that are younger than 12, and if you start getting 3/4 and half size guitars, the things never stay in tune. It's difficult to motivate them. I think 12 is a good age.
Yeah, I think you're starting to make decisions for yourself then. You're starting to discover things which you really like, music, bands that you sort of want to play like, want to do. So yeah, felt like a good age for me. I mean, I know that, some fantastic guitar players start really early, but certainly for me, that was the age where I was really getting obsessed by it and could completely drive myself forward without any kind of push from anybody else.
Yeah.
How about
And
you?
I was quite, I think I was quite late. I was 17, but I remember I was just obsessed with Oasis in that whole 94, 95 kind of era.
Yeah,
And I would just listen to music. There was this switch that just happened. So just before the run up to my exams when I was at high school,
Hmm.
and music just completely took over from the age of about 15.
Yeah,
And I would do kind of some keyboards at school. I somehow, I don't know why, I took music as a GCSE, even though I displayed no aptitude for music. And my music teacher said, "Why on earth are you taking GCSE music?" In short, he just said, "You suck." I
ouch.
was like, "Okay," but I think it was my mum. She said, "Why don't you just take music as like a soft lesson? You can just
Hmm.
use it as a bit of." I was like, "Oh, okay." Yeah, little did I know it. Then just music just sort of took off, and then yeah, I got a guitar for my 17th birthday. It sat there for about 4 months, not being used, and then I started working with a friend who also played,
Hmm.
and he said, "Oh, I'll show you some stuff," and that was it. It was just this huge trajectory. Um, and I kind of think, oh, if I'd started at 12, where would I be now? But then maybe if I started at 12, I wouldn't have had that musical kind of passion to kind of
Yeah,
push me into just playing.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's true.
I think
Something
I think
clicks.
we start when we start, and if it's the right time, it's the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amazing, great players that started really late.
Didn't I? Now is this you'll probably know this. Didn't Alan Holdsworth start at 24?
I don't know, actually. That's a good question. I've got various books on Alan Holdsworth, so I could
No.
definitely. Yeah, I don't know. I have a feeling he may have started later.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was a rumor that I heard, and I sort of rested on that. I was like, okay, that's fine. If he started at 24, I can start at 17.
Well, that's for all of us.
Yeah. And so when you started, did you have lessons? Did you just do it by ear? There was obviously no YouTube or anything like that.
Yeah, I was completely self-taught up until I went to music college
Hmm.
when I was 19. But up until that point, I was completely self-taught.
Okay.
Yeah, music college was the only formal education I had.
Hmm.
Although I tried to be very rigorous in the way that I sort of self-taught myself.
Yeah.
Tried to get as much information as I could and tried to make sure I was doing everything correctly. And obviously, there's a deal of trial and error.
Yeah.
But yeah, I managed to, teach myself everything up until jazz, and that's really what I went to
Okay.
music college to do, to really sort of learn about playing jazz, because I thought I'm not confident I can do that on my own, but
Hmm.
certainly everything up to that point, I'd sort of managed to get down.
So it was just a case. I assume it was just books, putting records on, figuring them out, playing along.
Yeah, lots of transcribing stuff by
Yeah.
ear, figuring things out as we used to do in the old days,
Hmm.
the days of black and white,
Yeah.
which was obviously brilliant ear training.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know, there's something about the sort of world of YouTube now where everything's given to you on a plate.
Mm.
I think, there's something about developing your own kind of voice, your own sort of style, which maybe helps when you're figuring things out for yourself and figuring out records for yourself and, finding ways around it yourself. But I don't know, I mean, it's easy to rail against YouTube, but actually, it's an extraordinary resource, and there's some insanely brilliant guitar players that have come
Yeah.
through that as a sort of training ground.
Yes.
But yeah, I do, as an old-fashioned thing, I
Yeah.
do sort of slightly miss the thing of having to try and figure out yourselves and make the discoveries for yourself.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and also guitar magazines were really important for me as well. I used to get, obviously, Guitarist was the big British magazine in those days, and then I used to get Guitar Player and Guitar World sent over from the States
Yeah.
every month, which was always very exciting, and they'd always have interesting columns in there. Tommy Tedesco famously had his studio column in Guitar Player magazine, which was always very entertaining.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'd pick up stuff from guitar magazines, and yeah, I'd pick up stuff from books. And Yeah, I'm trying to
Yeah,
think.
that's it. I mean, I think that's just. I think it's a great. I mean, those guitar magazines. I think they're kind of sadly sort of dying a bit of a death with things competing with YouTube. But the
Yeah,
amount of information and lessons and stuff that's crammed into a £6 magazine is just. I think it's such good value for money.
yeah, it's amazing. I mean, obviously, I spent a fair amount of time writing for guitar magazines.
Yeah.
It's one point in my life. So, I'm slightly biased towards them. I think they're a fantastic thing. And for anyone who's brought up in that sort of world, it was a very exciting thing to be able to do. But yeah, they're amazing value for money. And certainly back when I was learning, it kind of, as you say, in the era before YouTube, it opened a window on the world. So, you would find out about all these incredible guitar players from around the world and, particularly from the States, obviously, with the American magazines. And, you'd read interviews, long interviews in the case of Guitar Player magazine and Guitar World. There'd be big, long interviews, serious interviews, with serious journalists, with amazing players. And so it would open you up to new guitarists and new albums. And there'd be little exciting adverts in the back for guitar players you'd never heard of, who'd released albums. And, you could send away for them. And I can remember getting a Frank Gambale album, my first Frank Gambale album, being sent through on vinyl, and it all coming, and the vinyl was kind of all sort of twisted and kind of in the post. It got all mangled in the post and everything, I'm a guitar player. But yeah, they were a brilliant resource. I loved them. It was exciting, to get that every month. I don't know. Yeah, again, that's not something you have so much anymore, obviously, because everything is there. It's fine, sort of straight in front of you on your computer. Yeah, it was fun.
It was good. Yeah, it's good. I always used to enjoy it. And so you said you used to write for them as well. I mean, I remember I used to diligently read Guitar Techniques back when I was at college. And there was always, it seemed to be the holy grail of teachers in Guitar Techniques at that time. There was you, there was Guthrie, Dave, Jamie, and Eric Roach. Just like the amount of knowledge that was crammed into those particular magazines. Not knocking the things that are coming out today, but it was just such a. I like to think of that as the golden era of Guitar Techniques.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was a fantastic team. You're right. I was sort of. It was kind of odd. My way, I sort of worked my way up through guitar magazines, but in the same way, sort of worked my way down, because I started off in guitar play. What's it called? Total Guitar. Total Guitar, which is the biggest selling.
Yeah,
was the biggest selling one, and then went on to have my own column in Guitarist magazine, which was the sort of big classy one, which was the medium seller, and then finally got my own jazz column in Guitar Techniques magazine, which was the lowest selling one. So actually, I went from the biggest to the lowest sort of amount of sales, but obviously that was the more prestigious one.
It certainly was,
from the guitar player's point of view, and it was, I already knew kind of most of the guys that were writing for it, but it was still brilliant to, be in that company and to be considered to be sort of worthy of holding a couple of pages or a few pages, amongst kind of the likes of Guthrie and Eric and Dave and Jamie and co.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was good times. And so you all you all taught at the same college, you all at the ACM.
Yeah, probably not entirely coincidentally. ACM tried to get all the people who were names in the guitar community that could bring people in. I mean, I was already teaching at ACM. I was there sort of from the start, and was there for about 10 years. But yeah, bit by bit, sort of Jamie and Guthrie came in, Eric, Dave. So it was amazing to actually get to know all these guys and get to hang out with them. And yeah, I'm sort of very fond of them all. Don't see enough of them anymore, but sort of our paths cross every now and again, apart from Eric. Very sadly he died. Bless him. But yeah, they're all doing very well for themselves, which is
I think
brilliant
you all are. I think it's amazing to see how you've kind of gone off, especially Guthrie. He's just taken off from the guy that was just doing YouTube videos, and then went from that to Hans Zimmer. But when you listen to him play, it's no wonder.
Yeah, I know first time I met Guthrie, we was down at ACM, and then I suggested we went over to Anderton's, which was a music store nearby, and I was trying out a guitar and stuff, and then I sort of handed it to Guthrie and said, "Oh, do you want to check it out?" And he started playing, and I was like, "Whoa, okay."
Yeah.
Last time I'll be doing that.
Hold on, I'll give it another go. Hang on. Can I go back?
But yeah, it's been fantastic to see with Guthrie, because he was always so phenomenally talented. I mean, he's one of the most naturally gifted musicians I've ever met.
Yeah.
Possibly the most naturally gifted. And so it's nice to see that someone that we all thought was so sensational, so amazing, that actually when he was finally given the chance to for people to hear him worldwide, everybody else came to that realization as well. And he's right up at the absolute forefront of kind of guitar playing techniques, and is in amongst all the greats, and you've got people like Steve Vai sort of talking about how amazing he is.
Yeah, I know. I remember there was one lesson, I think it was a session styles lesson that we did, where we'd obviously take you through various different players, and we look at how they approach things. And he did this, like, it was like a 16-bar improvisation thing. He went from country to jazz to metal to fusion to bluegrass and then pop, and it was and it sounded like one coherent piece of music, but the technique on all of them and the playing of all of them was just flawless.
Yeah.
And you think, I don't know if I should. Do I carry on? Do I bother?
We did a CD thing they did was it a blues special? I think it was for guitar techniques or guitarist or something. And they hired a studio, and we all went down there, and I did Help the Poor and something else. I can't remember what the other track is. I can't remember what Guthrie was there to do, but they, to fill some time or to fill some space or whatever, they got Guthrie just to play over a backing track. And he basically sort of improvised just kind of a bunch of great sort of guitar players playing over a 12-bar blues. And then that went into the magazine as, like a kind of style file, and it was transcribed as, as if like all these great guitar players had all come into the studio and played. Yeah, it was Guthrie, and it was all completely off top of his head. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, sort of crazy.
Beck, Eric Johnson, and B.B. King, and it was absolutely phenomenal.
And so, in terms of things like technique and playing and practicing and getting better, where do you sit with it? Is it something that is still part of your life, or are you just sort of in maintenance mode just to keep yourself ticking over? Or do you sort of push yourself and think, do you know what, I really want to have a challenge myself, and I want to have a look at something like this?
I mean, it gets harder and harder to find time to practice consistently. I find as the sort of busier I get, and also, having family and, just sort of general life things, keeping everything going. But so it's not like in the early days, where you could spend all day, every day practicing.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time when I do have time to practice, I'll be practicing for a specific concert, a gig or session or whatever. So I don't get tons of time to work on stuff for myself. But yeah, I do still try and, sort of chip away at sort of technical things and, elements of playing and sort of, feel and time and stuff like that, when I get the chance. And also, if I'm sort of on gigs and stuff, I'll try and sort of focus on specific things to work on while I'm playing, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So rather than, it's good to just be in the moment and play, but sometimes, particularly if you're doing something which isn't utterly stimulating, which, as a working guitarist does occasionally happen, it must be said, you can actually try and find things to focus in on that, you want to improve in your own playing to, really try and nail as you're sort of doing it, as you're playing, which I kind of find helps me kind of stay engaged, things I'm doing. And, if you're sort of on a show or something, between numbers, I'll try and do sort of a little bit of practicing, some exercises or whatever to work on.
Okay. I can't have you here and not ask you about reading. So, how I mean, I think guitar players are just notoriously bad at reading. I'm not a competent reader, but I can read. So how did that come about in terms of your playing? Was that a college thing, or did you sort of make a conscious decision to learn how to read from day one?
Not from day one, but certainly as I was getting more accomplished, and particularly when I was sort of heading off to college, I thought, I really want to get reading together because I know what a useful skill it's going to be, and I know I'm going to need it at college. And for what I wanted to get into, because I wanted to get into doing sessions and all that kind of stuff. I thought it's something I want to get down. So it was, I think for a lot of guitar players, it feels like a necessary evil. Or an unnecessary evil, actually, for most guitar players. But for me, it was something I wanted to learn to do. I thought it would be very interesting. Frank Gambale, I remember, golly, the second time I've quoted him. He's a very good educator.
Is he on commission?
Yeah, I know. He's a very good educator. He has some very interesting stuff to say. But he was talking about reading music, and he said, notation, it's the language of music, in the same way as we all speak English, or obviously Spanish, or whatever. But as a musician, your language is sort of written music. So it's important to be able to communicate with others. And it does mean that you can play people from around the world who none of whom speak the same spoken language, but actually you can all communicate sort of musically. But yeah, I wanted to get it down. So I did a lot of work on it before I went to college, and then did a lot of work at college. And then went out into the real world and discovered that reading in college and reading in the real world are two very, very different things. And, thinking I was a pretty okay reader, actually, first time I had to do it on a gig, I just felt like a rabbit in the headlights.
Yeah.
But I found for me what really helped, I did loads of practice on it, obviously, but just constantly doing reading gigs. And pretty much everything I do now involves reading. Yeah. Reading music. So it definitely helps, doing it consistently, and having to do it for gigs.
Yeah.
But it's a useful skill, I think, and an important skill.
Yeah. Why do you think it is that guitar players generally aren't good at reading?
I think there's two reasons. I think the kind reason is that it's hard on the guitar because, if you play middle C, you can play that in 4 or 5 different places on the guitar. Whereas on the piano, that's one note. Yeah. Pretty much any other instrument, that's just one place that you can play that. So it's harder on guitar because of the fact you've got all these different options about where you can play things, so it makes it a bit more confusing, and it sort of slows the process down.
Yeah. The unkind reason?
The unkind reason is guitar players are kind of lazy.
Yeah.
And because there's a grand tradition in guitar playing that most people want to play blues or rock guitar when they start up playing, and you don't need to read music to do that kind of thing. And you can have, incredibly successful careers. Some of the greatest guitarists and wealthiest guitarists who've ever lived, never needed to learn to read music. Yeah. So it's not essential for what we're kind of presented with as guitarists, as kind of role models. But I think to be a more rounded musician, to be able to, move in wider circles, it really helps you to be able to read music, because it does mean, if you can't read music, you're shutting yourself off to a vast amount of kind of musical experiences. Yeah. As I said, basically everything that I do professionally, I wouldn't be able to do if I couldn't read music. So, it would massively limit the sort of career I could have as a professional musician.
Do you think it should be almost insisted upon that guitar players read music?
I think if you go to music college, it should be insisted upon. But I think, I'm a great one for free will. I think that, nobody should be forced into, music is primarily about having fun. And particularly, when you're younger, when you're starting out, it should only be about having fun. You should only do it because you enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think if, I always think like I don't really do much teaching anymore, but when I used to do teaching and you had parents, who were sort of forcing their kids to practice, and I was sort of thinking, well, why are you doing it if you have to be forced to practice?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's easy for me to say because I, just had the guitar in my hands the whole time. All I ever wanted to do was play and didn't want to do anything else. So I find it a bit hard to relate to that. But I also think, it's about having fun. If you have to be forced to do it, then maybe it's not for you.
Maybe, yeah.
And play football or something.
And so this is something I ask everybody. If you had to start playing all over again, but retain all of your knowledge, how would you do it? How would you go about it?
I think I'd drink heavily.
Yeah.
Golly, that's quite a question. I mean, I would find it incredibly frustrating, obviously, because the older you get, the more aware you are of what you want to be able to do and, what you can't do, which is why it's usually so much harder to teach adults than it is to teach kind of kids and teenagers, because they have a much clearer idea of what they want to be able to sound like, and they get more frustrated not being able to do it because they don't have the patience. Anyway, that's an aside. I think I would. I mean, I'm pretty conscientious, so I think I'd probably sit down for a lot of time every day and try and sort of train my fingers to move in the way that I know they're supposed to move in, and try and build up the sort of patterns and build up the sort of finger strength and the kind of memory in them. But golly, that's a big question.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard of people that I'm sure somebody told me that Dave Kilminster once, he was a lefty and then he played right-handed and he taught himself. I think he had an accident. I don't know how true that is.
I don't know if he had an accident, but I think it's true that he was left-handed or is left-handed. And certainly you have people who are left-handed and play right-handed.
Yeah.
And even some people who do the opposite. And I mean, you see it in sports as well. You see it in cricket all the time, that you have bowlers who bowl right-handed and bat left-handed and vice versa and whatever. So you can sort of learn to do both ways. But yeah, it'd be an interesting experiment, wouldn't it? Try and learn to play the other way around, to try and remind yourself what it feels like.
Teach yourself left-handed and be like, oh my God, how do I, yeah. Yeah, when I think about it, I have sympathy for all those little kids that come into lessons and they're like, right, come on, play a C chord. It's like, no, that's a G. No. But yeah, I think just daily sitting down with the instrument, just being in your hand, working through songs again.
Yeah.
It's I mean, that's how I learned. So, do your kids play?
Not really. Not yet. Again, I'm sort of want to leave them to discover things for themselves. My daughter plays a bit of piano.
Yeah.
Or did anyway, but then that sort of died away. And my son, he's got a very good singing voice, interestingly, which he just sort of does for fun while he's playing Minecraft. But he's he definitely shows a degree of sort of musical ability, so it'll be interesting to see if he does want to pick something up as he goes on. But I want to leave it to themselves to discover, as I was saying before, it's something that should only be about fun. So if they decide they think it would be fun and they want to learn to play an instrument, I'll absolutely encourage them, but I don't want to force them into doing anything.
Yeah.
How about your kids?
My eldest, she has piano lessons, but she's, again, it's striking that balance between letting her do it on her own and kind of encouraging her to do it, because she definitely has, she gets music, and I'll see her listening to music with her headphones on, and she's just like immersed in it. And when we put music on, if we're driving to school, she'll sit and she turns into the window when we're driving so that she can sing. And I've taken to a few concerts, and she's just immersed in it. She's singing the words. She's really into it. It's like, okay, so there's definitely that musical spark.
Hmm.
and I'll try my hardest not to diffuse it. But then I think we also just want to encourage her to go out and learn how to play. So she has lessons at school. She can play. She says she enjoys it, and we do catch her. I mean, she seems to lean more into singing more than she does playing.
Yeah.
We will hear her singing all over the house. She'll take her iPad, put it in a room. She'll put it in the bathroom. She'll put it in the she pitches well. So yeah, it's just striking that balance between encouragement and forcing them to do it. So
Yeah.
I mean, she's not said that she hates it and she wants to quit, which I
That's
think is a
good.
good start. So
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it's fun. I mean, I never really had any encouragement when I was learning. I just did it because I wanted to.
Yeah.
So,
Were you self-taught?
like I said, I had sort of on and off lessons with a guy that I used to work with, and then it kind of fizzled out. And then I would just go out and buy music books, put on CDs, try and figure it out. And I think I did it for about 2 years. Then I had lessons with a guy who was fairly close by, never very structured, but more kind of structured than when my friend was doing it.
Yeah.
And then, then I went to the ACM,
Right.
which is where, things started to get a bit more serious.
Yeah. Yeah. Where our paths crossed, I guess.
Yeah, well, I never actually had you as a lecturer.
Okay.
It was, you were always around. And, I think I had everybody else, Dave, Jamie, Guthrie, Eric, Mike Goodman, Georgia, everybody but you. So it's and how did you feel like the ACM was as a tutor teaching students?
It's an interesting one. Because obviously I was there for a fair amount of time. I think there was a good education to be had there. Definitely. Yeah. I think a lot of the onus was on the individual teachers to kind of provide their own sort of, which is how it should be, really. You don't want to just be teaching by rote out of a book. You want to be bringing people's experiences into it, and you had some great people teaching there, as we've already mentioned, who had a ton of experience to bring to it. So it was good that they had a lot of leeway to do that. I think it's always a danger with music colleges, guitar colleges, drum colleges, bass colleges, that they become too focused on getting people through the door. And sometimes, the actual quality of education that's given to them isn't kind of as strong or well thought out, well structured as, it comes across in the brochures. But certainly when I was at ACM and, I'd helped sort of set up the degree course in there, I used to work very hard to try and make sure that the people I was teaching got the best sort of and most rounded education they could, and I could sort of provide them with.
I felt there was a lot of
suitably diplomatic answer.
Yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, good. Politician's answer. I remember being there, and I remember hearing students complain about it, saying like, "Oh, you know what? It's shit. There's people just come. It's just about getting people through the door, and when you're out, you're on your own." And my kind of approach to it was, well, it's a school. It's not necessarily a hub to transition you from amateur musician go through school and here's your session, here's your job. It was just a case of, this is what we do, this is how we work, this is how we play, this is how we practice, this is the stuff and the material that we've worked through. Here it is. If you want to do what we do, start by doing this, and then the world's over there. Go and get a job. I think a lot of people came into the college assuming that they would just come out with a nice pop session right at the end of it.
Yeah.
And I think when reality hits, it hits quite hard.
It does. And I mean, sometimes like music colleges really sell the idea of, oh, you can get in a band and get signed and, get record contracts and all this kind of stuff, which is so unbelievably hard to do. And so much comes down to luck as much as anything. And I think it's sad sometimes when music colleges focus on that as opposed to actually providing a properly rounded sort of musical education, because I think the idea is people should be coming through there and should be able to come out and go into whatever sort of musical situation they're likely to come across and have the skills to be able to do well. That for me is what musical education should be.
Yeah, and then that was my approach to it, and that's kind of how I approach teaching myself to students. And if I'm teaching in college or in schools, it's not necessarily here's a gateway into the industry. This is okay. Sometimes you're going to be called upon to do, a funk session. Sometimes you're going to have to go from that into some acoustic finger picking. You need to be able to do both if you want a half decent career as a musician.
Yeah. I found when I went to music college, I went to a place called Musicians Institute in Los Angeles in Hollywood. And there, I mean, it was phenomenal. They had ridiculous faculty, vast amounts of students, but still lots of people would complain who went there. But I found, I just went there with the intention of practicing, learning, rinsing everything I could possibly get out of it. So I just, went to every class, sat in with every tutor that I could, use all the library resources. I'd basically sort of pretty much wake up in the morning and go there and, sort of clock out and go to bed kind of thing. So I just had a guitar in my hands the whole time and just tried to get the most I could possibly out. And got a fantastic education, but a lot of that was down to me. And that was the idea of that place. Everything is here. But you have to make the effort to get out of here. And one of the things I found there, I said I went there to learn to play jazz. They had amazing resources, amazing classes. But one thing which I couldn't get my head around at first was nobody was sitting us down and saying, if you do this, and then you do this, and then you practice this, and this, and this, and this, and this, that's how you play jazz. And I realized after a little while that actually I'm going to have to find my way through this. All the information is there, so I can ask the questions and there's all these sort of things, but I'm actually going to have to figure out a way to bring all this into my own playing and to practice this and, find my own way through it. And then, ask questions that can help me through that, which was, really valuable because it taught me a lot about, and, being self-taught, I already had developed that ability to kind of critique my own playing and to find ways around and find ways to get things down. But being in that environment and finding the same thing, it was a very good challenge for me to try and find ways that I could work all this information I'm getting into my own playing and, try and sort of develop it into how to practice jazz, how to practice all the different elements to become a sort of, competent jazz musician. And that was a place, you could go to MI and you could basically just like clock in and out, do the bare minimum hours and just go to the beach every day, which, a bunch of people did. Or you could be there sort of 24 hours a day, constantly playing and practicing and learning and working on everything and get the most extraordinary sort of musical education from the most extraordinary faculty, but a lot of it was down to you. So, going back to what you're saying, I think that definitely comes into it. We had some great students at ACM, particularly people who came through the degree course who've gone on to have really successful careers, and the people who'd sort of really applied themselves and really worked hard. The resources are there if you sort of want to use them. And I always liked it when people would come up and ask me a bunch of questions and want extra information and all this kind of stuff. But
it's, I guess it's like life, isn't it? You'll always get out what you put into it. And if you just go in there and, like you said, just drill through the bare minimum, you're going to get the bare minimum out of it. So,
yeah, it's like going to the gym, isn't it? If like the instructor tells you everything you need to do to lift weights, that's great. And then you leave the gym, you're not going to build any kind of physique. Whereas if you take that information and then apply it, do a load of, lift a load of weights, then you are going to build up a physique. So it's a pretty facile metaphor, but
it works. So how long were you at college for in Hollywood?
It was just a year. It was a very intense year. Of course,
okay.
It was about 44 weeks, something like that.
Okay. And was there any reason you chose that college?
Back then, it was probably for what I was interested in, which was jazz and fusion and rock and stuff. It was kind of the preeminent place in the world. It was that in Berkeley. Berkeley was much more kind of studious and focused on jazz, whereas MI was the sort of flashier cousin, which was much more, obviously had a ridiculous jazz faculty, but also, was famous because Paul Gilbert had been there and Frank Gambale had been there and Scott Henderson had been there and all ended up teaching there. And they had sort of phenomenal. Alan Hines was teaching there. Who else was teaching there?
So were they all your tutors whilst you were
there? Scott Henderson was there, who's one of my big heroes. And he's just the most amazing guitar player, the most brilliant educator. So he was there. Frank Gambale, he wasn't teaching there, but he came in to do like seminars. Similarly, Paul Gilbert, he came in to do seminars. Someone who was teaching there actually on the rock side was a guy called Russ Parrish, who played a really amazing shred player, but just sort of had come in at the back end of the shred boom, like slightly too late, when people were sort of losing interest in it. But he has re-emerged as Satchel in the band Steel Panther. It always amused me because he was a ridiculous player. He was amazing and, quite funny back then. So it's nice to see that he's, sort of found a way into the limelight, where he always sort of belonged, admittedly, in a slightly unorthodox way.
They're such a great band. It's not... it's just so over the top, man. Just so fucking... Just so 80s. You can almost smell the leather. That's cool. That's really cool.
There were amazing people there.
Yeah, and what drove you towards jazz?
I suppose I wanted to keep improving. I wanted to keep pushing myself, and jazz was the next challenge. I sort of felt like I'd understood, and got the sort of chop side, the rock chops, kind of side things down, and understood modes and all that kind of thing. And I was starting to listen to fusion and starting to listen to people like Scott Henderson and Alan Holdsworth, and I mentioned Frank Gambale and Larry Carlton. And I wanted to get that sort of stuff down. I wanted to be able to do those sort of things. There were things going on, harmony going on in there, which I didn't really understand how to approach. And so it was definitely, for a lot of rock players, is the way into jazz is kind of through fusion, because you've got the harmony of jazz with kind of, the vibe of rock and the sounds of rock. The thing. So, I wanted to learn about that, and I wanted to expand my horizons and become the best musician as I could be. And I didn't. I was just interested. I wanted to get it down. I wanted to learn about it. I didn't want there to be something which I couldn't do. There, I didn't understand, so I really wanted to push myself.
Okay.
It was good.
Nice. Okay. And is there are there any styles that you feel like, nah, it's just not for me? I'm not interested in that. or do you feel that you're fairly, or more than fairly, but just competent at everything?
I mean, I try and be competent at everything. I never studied classical guitar formally, so I'd never pretend to be a serious classical guitar player. Some of my friends are phenomenal classical guitar players. Absolutely brilliant. You properly studied it and amazing, and I sort of look at them with sort of deep envy. But it was never something which I had a great desire to be able to do.
Okay.
And even now, I'd love to be able to do it, and it's really useful as a session musician. It's a really important thing. But it's never something I properly studied or properly had a drive to get down and to do it properly. I mean, it's you have to be so completely dedicated. So that style of thing in flamenco guitar, the same. So I'd love to be able to do that, but never really had the deep love for that style of playing to really want to pursue it beyond just being able to get by on a session.
Yeah. How about country?
I used to, like all of us, I got all my country licks down, and did all those sort of things. That's always fun. I mean, it's not something I've worked at a huge amount more recently, and it's not something that comes up a huge amount in my professional career. You know, there might be like a country song or a country type thing on a jingle or something.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting one. You know, there's I have this thing about like session musicians, like being a session musician. I feel like we've all been slightly sold a myth about session musicians. Certainly, you know, from when I was coming up, this idea, the sort of Culver Hyan type session musician who's an unbelievable virtuoso at every conceivable style.
Yeah.
You know, you go into the studio and you have to be able to play like Albert Lee, you know, and you have to be able to play like Paul Gilbert, and you have to be able to play like B.B. King and all this kind of stuff. And actually, I mean, I've not done sessions in LA, but certainly in London, in my career, you know, you're never called upon to be a virtuosic country player. You need to be able to make country sounds sometimes and sound authentic in that. But if they want like a blazing country solo, they'll get a blazing country guitar player in to do it, you know. Similarly, if they want like a phenomenal sort of classical guitar thing, they'll get a phenomenal classical guitar player in to do it. So it's more being able to cover like a bunch of styles to be able to sound reasonably authentic in it. But it's rare that you ever have to sort of dig out. I mean, you might need to do sort of a blazing rock solo every now and again.
Yeah.
But it's not sort of a frequent thing. You know, most of the time you're kind of reading dots that are put in front of you and trying to play them well and in the style that's kind of indicated and with good sounds and that kind of thing. You know, it's rare that sort of the virtuosic element really comes into it.
Yeah. And so what's the bulk of your work like as a session musician?
It varies. I mean, you know, I play in some films, I play in a bunch of TV shows, do library music sessions with people, sometimes do stuff for artists. You know, some people contact me to play on tracks at home. I've got a studio at home, you know, as most musicians do these days because of how the music industry's changed, and particularly, you know, with COVID and stuff. So yeah, it's a variety of things. Some of it, you know, as I say, I do a bunch of stuff with orchestras, so quite often there'll be like, you know, orchestral things where I'll be singing with an orchestra, you know, on a session for a TV show or for a singer or something or whatever. But yeah, it's sort of, it varies. And, you know, the regularity of it varies as well. You know, sometimes you'll have a month where you'll do a bunch of things, and then sometimes you'll have 3 months go by where you'll have nothing. It's kind of, it's very random in how it goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always interesting. It's always a challenge.
Okay. And so you said you mentioned orchestras. What's it like playing in an orchestra? I mean, how big an orchestra are we talking? Are we talking symphony orchestra?
Yeah. I mean,
how's that?
The main orchestras I play with the BBC Concert Orchestra, and I play with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra.
Yeah.
And then also, you know, I get invited to go up to like Royal Liverpool Phil and the Halle and Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra and City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, you know, various, you know, there's a bunch of amazing orchestras in this country. And, you know, occasionally do things with other orchestras in this country, Philharmonia, things. So yeah, proper symphony orchestras. I don't generally do the kind of classical side of things unless I'm feeling really brave.
Yeah.
It's more tends to be when they're doing, you know, kind of crossover stuff.
Yeah.
So both, you know, the BBC Concert Orchestra and the Royal Phil, they do some quite, you know, commercial, and you know, the RPO is famous for symphonic rock, that kind of stuff. So I do a lot of those sort of concerts where, you know, it might be symphonic Queen or just, you know, symphonic rock where you're doing Guns N' Roses and Stairway to Heaven or whatever, but orchestral arrangements of them. Or, you know, one of the things I've been doing a bit the past few years is where they have filmed, like in the Royal Albert Hall, they'll show a film on a giant screen and we'll play music live to those. So
I've been to a few of them.
Ah, cool, man.
It's amazing. I think we saw Jaws and Aliens,
Ah,
which
fantastic.
was just it was incredible. But well, I know these are just like little details, but even with the orchestra playing the role in music for the like MGM studios, it was just like fuck, they're doing that as well. It was yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, to hear it live. I mean, especially John Williams' score was just
Yeah.
incredible, and I think the Albert Hall's just got such great acoustics that no matter where you sit, you've got just this wall of music coming at you. It's just amazing.
I think that's such a brilliant thing because it's such a visceral experience to actually hear the music live.
Yeah,
And they have subtitles on the screen because the idea isn't that the music is like hidden away in the background.
yeah,
You're featuring the music, you're seeing and hearing it. So it's great. As a musician, you want the music to be featured because
yeah.
there's such amazing music going on. So many of these movies.
Mm.
But yeah, it's brilliant to have it sort of featured like that, and it's really exciting to get to play. I did last year. We did 3 Bond films back to back. We did Casino Royale and Skyfall and Spectre.
Yeah,
So we did that over a week. Those 3 movies, which particularly the latter 2, which are both Thomas Newman scores. There's tons of guitar.
yeah,
Both of those, and real, it's real kind of modern kind of action
yeah,
movie sort of guitar writing. So loads of mad sounds and tempo delays and weird sound effects and ebo and slides and all sorts of sort of strangeness going on. So it's really interesting, really challenging.
Yeah.
To get it down, and lots of sort of pulsing kind of odd time, like kind of things, sort of 3 minutes at a time, counting all odd time bars and stuff. It's just, that's great fun to play.
Awesome. That's awesome.
But
And so what are you using live? Are you using a 4x12 for those? Just to really piss off the violins.
oh yeah, they love it. They love it when you're walking in with an amp. It is so funny, like with an orchestra. You come in, you sit down, you put your amp down, and immediately they start asking for screens.
Yeah.
To protect their hearing behind them before you've even played a note.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one with orchestras. It kind of depends on what I'm doing, but because volume is such a big issue, and understandably, they don't want to get blown away by a guitarist, because they're just playing acoustic instruments, very, very expensive acoustic instruments, which they're playing absolutely beautifully. And so they don't want to get drowned out and deafened by a guitarist. So I learned very early on that volume is a really important thing to be aware of, and to never play any louder than you possibly have to.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
But
one thing. Sorry, go on.
I'd say in the early days, you would have had to have used an amp because there were no Kempers, there were no mods, there were no profilers. So it was just a case of just coming in as quiet as you possibly could with good monitoring.
Yeah. I mean, I really learned a lesson. It was the first time I did symphonic rock with the RPO. And, as I said, we're doing Sweet Child of Mine and Stairway to Heaven, whatever. And I had my amp there and, my lovely rock guitars. And I was having to play so quietly. The amp, it was only a 20-watt amp, but it was on like a quarter of one.
Yeah.
It was so quiet. So the speaker's not moving, the valves aren't working. Yeah. And to try and, get that sound to be able to play that sort of stuff, it was just impossible.
Yeah.
For that style of music. So I started using a Kemper more and more for those sort of things, because I just realized, and also because I was doing a lot of broadcasts for Radio 2 and Radio 3 with the BBC Concert Orchestra. And I realized, like, using a Kemper live, firstly, whatever volume you're playing at, you've got the same sound.
Yeah.
Basically, with a little speaker. So you can play much more quiet and have a ton of distortion, whatever. Or whatever you need, really, for what you're doing. So you've got more control. And it's great because you can put acoustic through it as well. So it makes it easy. You don't have to take as much gear. Because often, as well as volume, there's the space element. If you've got 80 musicians on a stage, you might be sort of really constricted for room. So you don't necessarily have lots of room for, big pedal boards and lots of amps and things. But also, for broadcast, it means you can just DI and that the sound that you're hearing and that you've programmed in is what you're giving to them.
Yeah.
Because again, you can have like a mic on your amp, but they might have just sort of randomly stuck it there in a rush to get everything done, and then it gets knocked by like 4 different cellists walking past. So you never know where it's going to end up. So often, you listen back to radio broadcasts, and the guitar sound that you were hearing live, just really isn't captured at all on the radio, and sometimes it can be quite disappointing.
Not sure what happened there.
That's weird.
I don't know if that was yours or mine. So yeah, listening back, not sure the sounds that you hear aren't the sounds that you.
Yeah, they're not the sounds that you sort of wanted to put out.
And you spend time doing that as well. We spend time doing that, setting sound, setting pedals, setting amp levels, and then. Yeah.
Absolutely, spend a lot of time on that sort of stuff. So it's nice to have a bit more control, over the sound that I'm giving them, and knowing that what I'm hearing is what they're hearing, and what's going to come out on the telly or what's going to come out on the radio. Although it depends. I mean, I did a fantastic prom this year with BBC Concert Orchestra, Northern Soul Prom at the Albert Hall. It's part of the prom season, which was on the telly. And for that, because we wanted to be sort of as authentic as possible. So, I had my kind of relic telly and a kind of hollow body thing, and my sort of relic Strat, and kind of a Lazy J, sort of old deluxe type amp, and a bunch of real pedals, because I thought, I want this to be as authentic to the sound world as possible, and really spent some time positioning the mic and making sure it didn't get jogged or whatever. And that was fantastic to actually get to use a real amp again. It seems ridiculous to say, of course, but in that sort of world, and to actually properly play and properly make those noises with real valves, and
it makes a difference. I had to go down the route of using little processors and line 6 things, and I think it was the other day, 2-3 weeks ago, I thought, oh fuck it, I'm going to use an amp for this gig, and there's just that the air moving behind you and just the speaker, it just makes a difference to how I play, how it responds to.
Definitely,
just feels so much nicer. I mean, they're getting close. They're super close.
Yeah, you can get amazing results, and I think now we're well past the stage where actually something like a Kemper or a Fractal or whatever else for recording sounds better than a badly mic'd amp.
Yeah, and
so often, certainly, sort of, a lot of the sessions which I do, where you've got a limited amount of time, so you don't get a morning to work on mic placements and stuff. It's just sort of stick a mic in front of the amp and record the thing. So quite a lot of the time you end up with better results using that sort of thing. But yeah, it's crazy to say, but it turns out it is good using amps. They do sound good. They are great. It's just that they're not always practical in this day and age, depending on the sort of music you're doing, the sort of worlds you're moving in. But yeah, I'd always use an amp by choice. But sometimes you have to be practical, don't you?
Yeah, and it's also studio time's expensive. People's time is expensive, and if you could just rock up with a board, plug it straight into the desk, and away you go, you could be out in, an hour earlier. Although
interestingly, in the studios generally they prefer you to use amps. They prefer stick a mic and mic that, which is fair enough, because obviously they want to do stuff as well as possible and get it sound as great and as authentic as possible.
Yeah.
So they tend to. I mean, they don't stop you from using a Kemper or whatever, but they tend to prefer to have a mic'd up amp.
Okay.
Do things, properly, authentically, because obviously it's still, the quality and the way it sits in the mix. The real amp, does kind of win out, but
cool.
Yeah, it is getting very close.
Yes. Okay. I think that is as good a time to end as any. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really, really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me. My pleasure.
And the last thing I'll just ask you is, if people wanted to, get into that world of orchestras and session playing, and what's your top tip?
Work on reading music.
Yeah.
I know we've
hammered that, I think.
Hammered that one. Definitely work on reading music. Be sensitive, work on being sensitive to what's going on around you. Don't think it's all about me. Be aware of volume. Make sure you can get good sounds, easily sort of and controlled. Have reliable equipment. Be able to cover sort of different bases. And then after that, a lot of it's sort of gradually sort of working your way up and getting known and sort of, getting to know musicians. I mean, musical theatre is a sort of good way into a lot of those sort of things. I used to do a lot of musical theatre for a while, doing shows to shows, and it's a good way to sort of meet musicians and get in on the scene and people that are sort of doing that kind of work. So, definitely musical theatre. I mean, it's not my greatest love, it must be said, which is why I don't do much of it anymore. But it was definitely a good career move, and I got a lot of experience and met a lot of people through that sort of world, and sort of it was great as well for paying the mortgage and doing things for a while. So that's a good way into developing the skill sets that you need and to meeting the sort of people that you need. So that could be something to look at.
Definitely. Cool. All right. Thank you again. Thank you.
No, you're welcome, mate. Thanks for having me.
And we will speak soon.
Nice one. Thanks, Tim.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.